The WNBA is back. WNBA season starts later this week. Whether you've been a fan from the beginning, whether you're a new fan that's just come on, this has the potential to be one of the biggest seasons ever in the history of the WNBA, and we're going to cover it all in this video. We are going to do a team-by-team breakdown, look at the rosters, answer some big questions. I'm going to unveil my new player ratings. I've got a new star kind of tier list for every player in the WNBA, so I will unveil what that means. I'm going to make my award picks. I'm going to make my championships picks. So a big video previewing everything in the WNBA. If you like any part of this video, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm just getting started. If you like this WNBA content, I will be doing plenty of WNBA stuff throughout the season. I'll also be doing a bunch of NBA stuff, a little bit of MLB throughout the summer, NFL once that gets started. So plenty of things to come. So again, if you liked any part of this video, make sure to subscribe. Let me know down in the comments if there's other stuff you want to see, whether WNBA stuff, other sports, let me know. I'm just getting started. Plenty more things to come over the summer. Before we get into the team-by-team breakdown, I want to introduce what I mentioned at the top, and that is my new player star rating system. I don't like to typically rank players. I think they're useful at times. I think they lead to really good debates. But for the purpose of this video, I don't want to spend a ton of time debating if Napheesa Collier or Breanna Stewart is better for this upcoming year. That's a good debate you can have. If you want to have that, great. We can have that in another video. But instead of ranking them, I want to just essentially put them into tiers. And so that's what I've done. I'm just going to do it based on star ratings. And so I'll break that down in a second of what each star rating means. But essentially, I'm going to give every player, or at least every player in the top 10 of the rotation in the WNBA a star rating. We're going to sum that up for each team. Each team is going to get a total. That's how we will do our rankings. So let me introduce my star rating system, then we'll get to the team-by-team breakdown. At the top, we have the 5-star players, and these are probably who you can expect. I'm calling these the championship level stars. They are the stars that are most likely going to lead their team to a title. They are the best player on a championship team. They are the best of the best. I only have 4 5-star players this year, and you can guess who they are. We will get to them when we do the team-by-team breakdowns. Right below that, the 4.5-star players, I'm calling this group the best player on a contender. And I only have 2 players in this group. You can argue that maybe they should be 5-star players. To me, they're just slightly below, maybe not quite 5-star, but they are right below. I think there's a clear top 6 in terms of WNBA players. They fit into these first 2 tiers. The 4-star players is the next group, and this is where the groups start to get a little bit bigger. I have 15 players that fit into this group. These are the all-star players or the championship second options. The naming is going to get a little bit weird because you can have a 4-star player on a bad team. There are a few 4-star players on bad teams this year. But these are the players that maybe aren't quite the best player on a championship team, but they're all-star level. They are good to great players in this league. And I think they would be a second option on a championship team. I don't know if they can necessarily win a title as the best player, or at least for this upcoming year, but they're good players and they're all-star players. They are 4-star players in my book. The tier below that, the 3.5-star players, I think these are starters on a contending team. These are players that are good players and they would start on a championship team. They might not be the star. They might not even be the second best player, but they are really good players. And they are really key to a championship team. So they are maybe kind of right below that 4-star, but they are still really good players. The next group below that is the 3-star players. I have 22 players that fit this criteria this year. These are the solid starters. You won't really bat an eye if they're starting. They might not be like big time game changers, but they're solid starters. And whether that's on a contending team, whether that's on an average team, they're solid starters. They might not be anything much greater, but they're going to be solid players for your team. So they kind of fit kind of that average middle tier 3-star players. The next group below that is the biggest that I have, the 2.5-star players. I have 32 players in this group. To me, the 2.5-star players are maybe your average starters or would be key playoff rotation players. If they're starting for you, that's maybe not the greatest, but if they were on a contending team, they'd be really key rotation players. So they might come off the bench for a really good team, But that doesn't mean they're not good. That means they are solid rotation players. 2.5 stars is the biggest group. A lot of players, I think, are going to fit this category. Right below that is the 2-star players. This, I think, is just your average rotation player. We have 28 players to fit this group. They're solid. They're good rotation players. Not going to be a ton outside of that, but they deserve in a rotation. And then the last group I have are the 1.5 star. These are typically going to be some younger players, maybe some vets towards the end of the bench. I'm not going to have a 1-star group. I don't know if I need to really call anybody a 1-star player. So the 1.5 are going to be kind of the end of the bench players at the end. So if you add all those players up in every tier that I have, that's 130 players spread across the 13 teams. So we are going to rank every team based on adding up the sum of their star ratings. We're going to start from the bottom, go all the way up to the number 1 ranked team I have this year. We did have a few ties. Ties I've determined based on the rankings of their starting 5. Because to me, at the end of the day, if you have a really good starting 5, that matters a little bit more than having more depth. So ties are going to be broken by your starting lineup. I'm not going to spend too much time going over every single player. If there's a player you think maybe should have been a 2.5 star versus a 2-star, you can put those down in the comments. I want to have conversations like that. Let's just keep them civil. Let's have debates. Let's talk about certain players, but there's no reason to go really defensive on any of these. If you have a complaint that a player should be higher or lower, that's great. Let's have the conversation. Doesn't have to go into anything else. So let's start off with the lowest team this year. We did have a tie at the bottom, so they are technically tied for 12th, but based on the tiebreaker of their starting lineup, the team at the bottom for me this year is probably no surprise. It is the expansion team this year. Their first season, it's the Golden State Valkyries. I'm going to give 2 big questions for each, and then we'll break into their roster, what it's going to look like. The 2 big questions for me for Golden State is, what will the team's identity look like in their inaugural season? And then 2, who's going to stand out in a group that has a lot of role players, but doesn't really have a lot of stars? And so if we bring up their roster, you can take a look at the star ratings that I have for each player. As I mentioned, they have a lot of good role players, and that's really the case for an inaugural season. They were able to get, the 8th, 9th best player on every team, and that's kind of what the team looks like. Because when you go kind of spot by spot, they have players I like, whether that's Kayla Thornton, Veronica Burton, Chechi Zandalicini, Temi Fagbenle, who was obviously the big surprise that they were able to get her from Indiana. A lot of those players played big roles and big minutes for their teams last year. They were just kind of maybe a key rotation piece, key bench player, but still, they're good players, and they're players that I like. The problem for Golden State, and the problem for really any expansion team in their first season, is of the players that you selected, who can take the next step up? Because outside of Tiffany Hayes, who obviously was their big free agents addition, she will be good. She's going to put up a lot of shots. She's going to be their star. Who else can step up outside of her? Is it someone like a Kayla Thornton? Is it a Temi Fagbenle? Is it someone like a Kate Martin? That's going to be the big thing for Golden State this year. They're not going to be great. You don't really expect an expansion team to be great their first year or two. But are there pieces that you can build through? Because they have the depth. And that's why I think they're not far and away the worst team by the star rating system. Because you can see a lot of the players I like. There's a lot of 2.5 star players, which, if you go back to what that means, those are kind of key rotation players on a contending team. They might not be big time starters, but they're good rotation players. And so Golden State has a lot of them. The big thing is just going to be, can any of those players turn into star players? That's going to be the big question. And then the other question I had was just, what are they going to play like? What's their play style going to be like? It's always fun to watch an expansion team in their first year. It's going to be a lot of fun. I don't expect them to be great, but it's always fun to have a new team in the WNBA. So it'll be fun to watch them throughout the season. The next team that was tied for 12th in my rating system was the Connecticut Sun. They are tied for 12th also with 24 stars. My 2 big questions for them are, will the vets like Marina Mabrey and Tina Charles last the whole season? And then 2, can the young players show some potential? And in particular, there's 2 players that I'm excited to watch, and that's JC Sheldon, who they got in a trade and then their first-round pick this year, Anissa Morrow. Those two players, I think, are going to get a lot of playing time. And as we throw up their roster and their star ratings, Marina Mabrey, we've all talked about it. I don't know if she's really going to be long in Connecticut. I don't know if she wants to be there. Will she stay the whole year? Who knows? Again, you would expect them to probably trade her at the deadline, assuming they're not in playoff contention, because this year is really all about any sort of young players. Connecticut is going through a complete rebuild. Gone are the days of Alyssa Thomas, DeWanna Bonner, and others. And frankly, this kind of looks like an expansion team. You have your one star in Marina Mabrey. Other than that, it's a bunch of vets, role players, and young players. And so, as I mentioned, the big question is going to be, can some of those young players step up? JC Sheldon's going to get a lot of run. Anissa Morrow, I don't have her starting. Tina Charles, Olivia Nelson-Ododo are there, but I think she's going to be big. Can they get anything out of those two? And can they build just some sort of momentum? We also, unfortunately, got the news earlier today, as of recording this at least, that it sounds like Connecticut's going to be put up for sale. Rumors are they might be put up for sale and then relocated. So unfortunately for Connecticut fans, unfortunately for really just WNBA fans, it's not a great situation in Connecticut. For me personally, I always hate when teams relocate. Of course, I would hope that pretty much everybody thinks that. But living up here in Seattle, as a Storm fan and as a Sonics fan in the NBA, I have big issues towards relocation. So it's sad to hear that Connecticut is probably leaning that way. Their roster isn't great, but they belong in Connecticut. I hope they don't leave. But for this season, it's not going to look great. And they are definitely in a rebuilding phase as they kind of move on from, again, the Alyssa Thomas era, as we'll call it. The next team up in 11th place, just above the bottom two teams at 24.5 stars, is the Washington Mystics. And my two big questions for them are, how will the rookies and sophomores gel together? And then two, are they going to try to compete, or will they move on from some of their key veterans? Let's throw up their roster, look at the star ratings. A lot of their roster is young, and a lot of their roster actually has some pretty good enticing pieces, whether that's Sonia Citron, Kiki Iriafen, their two picks from this year, whether that's Aaliyah Edwards from last year, whether that's young players like a Jade Milburn. They have some fun young pieces, and it would have been a lot more fun if we would have seen Georgia Amore with this group. But can this group that they building the last couple of years, can they start to build a foundation? Because that's really the key for Washington. Can they use these last two draft classes as kind of a slingshot into their future? Because they're not going to really compete this year. The question is, can they compete somewhat? If not, probably vets like Brittany Sykes, Stephanie Dolson will get traded. But really the key is years down the road. And can they turn an Aaliyah Edwards, a Sonia Citron, a Kiki Iriafen into their foundation? I like a lot of those players. I think Aaliyah Edwards is one of the players to watch early on this season. Can any of those players turn into stars? That's the question. So a fun young team. Would have definitely been more fun with a Georgia Amore, who unfortunately tore her ACL. But still, a young team, a team that has some potential. I like their roster a little bit more than the bottom two. But these are definitely the three kind of rebuilding younger teams in the WNBA this year. Next up, we have a three-way tie for 8th place. So we got three teams in the 8th, 9th, and 10th spot, all that have 27 stars. So again, the bottom three teams I think are definitely a tier below the rest of the group. Everyone else outside of that I think has legitimate chances to make at least a playoff spot, at least some sort of a playoff run. But first up, tied for 8th, just based on the tiebreaker of their starting lineup, is the Chicago Sky. And my two big questions for them are, can Angel Reese and Camila Cardoso take the next step? And then two, how will their additions of their veteran guards help this team? And so as we throw up their rotation this year, obviously the big one is Angel Reese. Her and Camila Cardoso are going to be big this year, literally and figuratively. Chicago was always going to try to lead this team into the future with this duo. They made that decision last year when they selected two bigs in their draft class. And Cardoso missed a little bit of time, kind of had a slow start. But Angel Reese has turned into a star. And you can disagree with that. You can say she doesn't deserve a 4-star rating. To me, she's an impact player. And does she have lots of room to grow? Yes. Do I think she can kind of be above a 4-star player? Potentially not. This might be her ceiling. But even if she doesn't improve on her finishing, even if she doesn't improve on the offensive end, she is always going to be a very impactful player, because even her as a rookie, which, if you're rooting for her, you hope this is the worst she will ever be. Even her as a rookie was very impactful. And you might not like the way it looks. I agree, it doesn't look the best at times, but she is still very impactful. And she causes problems both on the offensive and defensive end. And she is going to be a good player for a long time. Again, now the question is, can she take the next step? That I'm a little bit more hesitant of, but still, I'm not hesitant to put her as a 4-star player. She is one of the top 20 to 25 players right now. Now the question is, can she rise from there? And so her, along with Cardoso, are obviously the focal point. But what I liked that Chicago did and said, hey, we got these 2 young bigs. Let's not just wait around and get some other young pieces, potentially be bad for another year or two. Let's get some actual guards that can help them be even better. Because last year, yes, they had Kennedy Carter, who was great in some areas, but she wasn't going to help Angel Reese and Camila Cardoso develop. And so they did the smart thing, brought in Courtney Vandersloot, who both on and off the court is going to help Reese and Cardoso. And then making the trade for Ariel Atkins is going to make this a somewhat competitive team. And I think, we'll talk about it at the end. For the last couple of playoff spots, it's going to be a battle. And I don't know if Chicago will necessarily make the playoffs, but they have at least positioned themselves to be in contention. And I think a lot of times teams have a young core, have young players, and they say, I don't know if it's worth it. Let's just wait. Let's not be proactive. And then there are teams like Chicago that are saying, no, let's be proactive. Let's get some veterans in here and actually start to try and win. Let's not just try to be bad for multiple years in a row. And so I'm excited to see what they look like this season. The next team tied for 8th, also with 27 stars, is the Atlanta Dream. And my 2 big questions for them are, does the addition of both Brittany Griner and Brianna Jones turn Atlanta into a serious contender? And then 2, can Ryan Howard elevate into one of the top stars in the league? And so as we bring up their rotation for this upcoming year, with the addition of the 2 bigs, they've got a pretty fun starting lineup. Jordan Canada sounds like she might miss a couple weeks. She might miss the start of the year. But if she gets back healthy, pairing those 3 guards with 2 at least fun, potentially star bigs, that's an enticing group. And Atlanta kind of has been the team the last few years that's just kind of been stuck in the middle. My one concern is they might still just be stuck in the middle, but at least they're going to have a fun team to watch. And I think if everything goes right with that 5, it could be a team that's a tough outcome playoff time. The big question, as I mentioned, though, is going to be the bigs, and is going to be, can Ryan Howard take the next step? Or maybe Alicia Gray, if you think she's their number 1 player. But to me, Ryan Howard is their 1 4-star player. And at the end of the day, if you want a team to elevate from maybe that middle tier to one of the top teams in the league, you need star players. And I think Ryan Howard is a fun player to watch. I think she is a top 20, 25 player in the league. Can she make the next step? Because if she can, this is a fun team. They have shooting, they have size, they have multiple ways to beat you, but it also just shows how competitive the season could be, because they are tied for 8th. They might not even make the playoffs with this team. So it's going to be a fun team. It's going to be fun to watch, see how they gel together, and see if they can kind of rise from this middle tier that they've been stuck in. And then the final team that is tied for 8th is the Phoenix Mercury, which might be a little bit surprising to some, but also sort of makes sense when you look at their roster. My 2 big questions for them are, can the big 3 coexist together in Phoenix? This is our first opportunity to see Kalia Copper, Alyssa Thomas, and Satu Sabli together. Can they coexist? And then 2, do they have enough, or frankly, any depth to compete for a championship this year? Because as we pull up their roster, their starting lineup has the potential to be great. And their starting lineup has the potential to be a championship level starting 5. The problem is, it's really 3 players, and we don't really know what else. Alyssa Thomas is our first 4.5-star player. As I mentioned, there are 2 players that I have in that group. She is our first 4.5-star player. I think she's still a top 5 player in the league. She's going to be great. We know Kalia Copper is great. We know Satu Sabli at least can be great. We'll see if she can bounce back for a full season this year. The problem is, outside of that, I don't really know what else you're going to get. Right now, I have Sammy Whitcomb and Natasha Mack in the starting lineup. if you want to throw in Kalani Brown, Celeste Taylor, whoever you want to throw out there, it's going to be an adventure trying to find players that fit around that big three. And so to me, I could see this season going one of two ways. You could tell me that Alyssa Thomas, Kalia Copper, Satu Sabali, you could tell me those three are three of the best 10 players in the league. The Mercury turn into a really good team led by them. Or you could tell me that they don't really have anything outside of that and the Mercury struggle. And I think this is going to be a really good test case for, can you have a WNBA team that is so top heavy? Because we actually just got an example of this in the NBA, and it happens to be in the same city, ran by the same owner. The Phoenix Suns, we just saw, have a big three: Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and a whole bunch of question marks, and it did not go well. And Matt Ishbia, who owns both the Suns and the Mercury, he's got a lot of good ideas and a lot of positives that I've seen from him, but the way that both teams have been constructed, and I don't necessarily want to blame him, but at some level, it all goes up to him. Those are two big question marks for teams. And again, we saw the Suns and how that's worked out. And spoiler alert, it was not good. That's what I'm worried about with the Mercury. Because again, if you told me the big three is great and performs at a top 10 level, then sure, I could see this team being a contender. The problem is Alyssa Thomas, as good as she is, isn't getting any younger. Satu Sabali, it's been a year now since we've seen her at kind of a first team level. Can she bounce back? I don't know. We'll see. And then Kalia Copper, good player, but can she be a great player? I have question marks. And when those are kind of really your only three big time players, I have concerns. And so, again, surprising maybe to some to see the Phoenix Mercury tied for 8th when they have three of the potentially top 10, 15 players in the league. But also when you look at the rest of the roster, it's not surprising. So this is the one team I'm really interested to see how they perform this year. There's so many different ways it can go. We'll see how it ends up. Next up is the 7th team with 28 stars on their roster, and that is the Dallas Wings. Their big question, obviously, is how does Paige Bueckers adapt to the WNBA? And then 2, do they have enough inside to compete right away? Because as we pull up their roster, they have a lot of guards. Both Paige and Arike, they are going to be a lot of fun to watch throughout the season. Throw in DeJounte Carrington. That's going to be a fun backcourt, and that's going to be a fun trio to kind of watch to see how they kind of fit together. The question is going to be more inside, and really it's the trio of Nalissa Smith, Tiara McCowan, and Maddie Segrest. 2 of those 3 I think are going to start. I have Nalissa Smith and McCowan. You can put in Maddie Segrest as well. Can they get enough out of those 3? They certainly could. All 3 of those players have potential. All 3 of those players also have some concern, and they're players that have a ton of talent. It also just necessarily hasn't shown at times for those 3. And so that is going to be the big X factor. Obviously, Paige, she's going to be the big storyline. Her and Arike are going to be a lot of fun to watch. But can that duo and can that trio with DeJounte Carrington, can they make up enough for the question marks inside? That's going to be the big storyline. And again, when we're talking about this kind of middle tier of teams, the 3 teams that were tied for 8 that we talked about, I would put Dallas in this group. These are going to be the teams that are fighting for a playoff spot. And unless Paige just comes out and has a Caitlin Clark type season last year, maybe she can have the same impact. Maybe she can lead them to the playoff spot. But other than that, it's going to be tough. And it's going to be tough fighting for those last 2 spots. Arike, Paige, I think, have enough talent to do it. But I think there are enough question marks that I'm not quite sure. So it's going to be fun to watch. Paige is obviously going to be a big star, but definitely question marks throughout the rest of their roster. Next up in 6th, with 28.5 stars right above the Dallas Wings, are the LA Sparks. And my 2 big questions are, will Kelsey Plum be a good lead guard for this young Sparks team? And then 2, can Rickea Jackson take the next step into stardom? Kelsey Plum was obviously the big addition. I have her right now penciled into the 1 spot. That, I think, is going to be a big question. And right now, the 5 that I have out there, I think is a good, talented team. The question is, how is it going to mesh together? We've seen Kelsey Plum obviously have a ton of success in Las Vegas, but she wasn't the main focus. And she's not necessarily going to be the main focus. You know, you have a team with the Erica Hamby. You have Rakia Jackson, who again, hopefully can take the next step. So there's other pieces, and they have a bunch of good young pieces. Bringing in Kelsey Plum will help. But how does it coexist together? That's the big question. Because if they can somehow figure it out, and if they can figure out without maybe a more true point guard on the team, this could be a really fun team, especially when Cameron Brink comes back, hopefully early on this season. The Sparks have a lot of good young talent. They took a big swing in trading for Kelsey Plum. Is it going to pay off? We're going to see. And as I mentioned for Chicago, the Sparks are another one of these teams that says, hey, we got a lot of young talent. We could sit around, collect more young talent, or we could start to accelerate it and potentially be good now. And the Sparks are going to be an interesting case because, yes, Kelsey Plum is great, but they traded what ended up being Dominique Malonga and Lee Yarou, two really enticing young bigs, for Kelsey Plum. And again, it could turn out great. Kelsey Plum is a great player. Or it could be that maybe they should have kept collecting some of these young pieces and it could have turned into something even greater. So that's the risk that the Sparks run. That's the risk that teams like Chicago run. But I like it. The Sparks are going for it. They are going to be a fun team. They are going to be fighting for a playoff spot when it's all said and done. Next up in 5th place, and to me, kind of finishing out this middle tier of teams all the way down to Chicago, is the Seattle Storm, my team up here in Seattle. My two big questions for them is it addition by subtraction with losing Jewel Lloyd? And number 2, how will all their bigs factor into the rotation? As I mentioned, I'm up here in Seattle. I got my Storm shirt on. I got plenty of thoughts, and I'm going to try to boil them down, not spend too much time on the Storm. But obviously, they don't have Jewel Lloyd. That was the big offseason move. And on the surface, whenever you lose your franchise player, it seems like you're going to take a step back. But I don't think that's necessarily the case for the Storm. And it could be, like I mentioned in my question, it might be addition by subtraction. And that's not to say Jewel Lloyd's not a good player. We'll talk about her when we get to the Aces. But turning Jewel Lloyd into a few kind of better rotation pieces might be what the Storm needed. And I think when we look at their roster, there's a lot of depth, maybe not necessarily in pure numbers. The Storm are essentially going to be playing 10 players early on the season. Katie Lou Samuelson got hurt. There's lots of issues with the CBA. We won't get into it, but the Storm are going to start out with 10 players. So they don't literally have a lot of depth. But when I say they have depth, I think they have a lot more depth when it comes to really solid pieces. And that was what the Storm were missing last year. Because last year they had a similar starting lineup, just exchanging Jewel Lloyd for Alicia Clark. And that's a good starting lineup. But the problem for them was they didn't have a lot of depth outside of that. And I think now bringing in Alicia Clark, getting both Lee Yarou and Dominique Malonga, even signing players like Lexi Brown, Erica Wheeler, Zaya Cook, I think there's a little bit more depth. And I think that's a positive. The downside for this team, and what I think is kind of keeping them just away from that top tier, is really 2 things. One is there going to be a player on this team that can be a top 5, top 10 player in the league? You could argue it's either Skylar or Nneka. Both of those players I have as 4-star players. I think they are certainly top 20 players in the league. But as I keep mentioning, in order to be a true championship contender, I think you need a top 5, if not at a minimum top 10 player. And I don't know if the Storm quite have that. So I think that's one, I don't want to say issue, but one kind of slight hesitation. And then 2, which is the more actual concerning on the court basketball problem, is does this team have enough shooting? Because that was the problem last year. Storm were dead last in 3-point percentage. Bringing in Alicia Clark helps. Lexi Brown can shoot it a little bit. But that's still a problem. And this isn't a team that's going to beat you a lot from the outside. This is a team that's going to be physical. It's going to be a very defensive-minded team. And it's going to rely on their bigs. Because their big rotation of, obviously, Nneka and Ezzy starting it off. But then Lee Yarou, Dominique Malonga coming off the bench. I don't know what necessarily those last 2 players are going to give you this year. But if those 2 can turn into kind of really solid bigs, that's going to be a really tough rotation to have to deal with. Because we know Nneka and Ezzy are all-stars. We know they are at least 3.5, 4-star level players. And if Lee Yarou and Dominique Malonga can turn into kind of young versions of that, that's where this team can succeed. They're not going to be an outside shooting team, but they are going to be a hard, physical, defensive-minded team that's going to be led by Skylar and her mentality. I don't know if this team has quite enough, like I said, to get into that top tier, but to me, they're the closest. And if you're looking for a dark horse that's maybe not in that first tier, I think it's the Storm. And I don't think that's necessarily my hometown bias. They have a really good team. Just do they have enough to get over the hump? All right, now we get into what I think is the top tier, the Final Four teams. In fourth, I have the Las Vegas Aces coming in at 30.5 stars. My two big questions for them are, does this group have one last title run in them? That's not to say that they can't ever win again, but I think we're nearing the end of this kind of core group in Las Vegas. And then two, how does Jewell Loyd fit into the Kelsey Plum role? The Aces are still great. And even though it's been a couple years since we've seen them at the top, the Aces still have a ton of talent. And I mentioned we have 4 5-star players in the league. It is probably led by A'ja Wilson, who is our first 5-star player. I'm not ranking players. I don't want to spend too much time on it. If you don't have A'ja Wilson as your number one player, we're probably going to disagree. I'll just put it at that. She is still really good. Chelsea Gray is still really good. Jackie Young is still really good. Jewell Loyd, despite her struggles last year in Seattle, is still really good. So, like the Aces have always been, at least at the top, the Aces are still one of the top teams in the league. And this is a good time to point out, if we're ranking this team by their starting lineup, they're tied for second. Only reason they're in fourth by rating is their bench and is their lack of depth. But that's kind of always been the case for the Aces. And they've relied on their starting 5, and they're going to do it again this year. And if A'ja Wilson continues her dominance, if Chelsea Gray can take some of her unrivaled excellence into the WNBA, if Jackie Young continues, if Jewell Loyd has a good season for Las Vegas, this easily could be the best team in the league. And this could be a good reminder that the Aces still are the best of the best. There's just some concern, and that was the concern that we had last year. A lot of it's going to roll into this year. The big one is obviously depth. Do they have enough outside of that? But then, can the starting lineup gel together? We know what A'ja Wilson's going to do. I don't have any questions about that. But can Chelsea Gray be a top-tier player? If you looked at her unrivaled season, you'd say yes. And she was actually the last person I had at the 4.5 stars. I just, at the last minute, bumped her down to a 4-star. I felt like I was swayed based on the unrivaled season. I think she is still probably in that 4-star group. But can she elevate above that? That's a big question. Can Jackie Young maybe elevate to that level? And then, as I mentioned, can Jewell Loyd fit into the Kelsey Plum role? On the surface, you would say yes. Jewell Loyd doesn't have to be the kind of face of the franchise. She doesn't have to be kind of at the top of team scouting reports. She's going to get a lot of open looks, and she's going to get a lot of opportunity. Can she adapt into that role? My hunch is yes, but that's going to be a question. If those 4 players are on their A game, this team can win the championship. If they don't, they might fall just short. But I think there's a reason they are still in the top tier. They are still one of the best teams in the league. The number 3 team, right above the Aces at 31 stars, is the reigning runner-ups, and that is the Minnesota Lynx. My 2 big questions for them are, how did they respond to their last second defeat in the championship last year? And then 2, who steps up to fill some of their key depth pieces? Because as we throw up their roster, we all know their stars. And Nafisa Collier is the second 5-star player we have. I am certainly going to talk about her more when it comes to the awards. Spoiler alert, we will be talking Collier in the award section. We know what she's capable of. We know what Kayla McBride's capable of. Courtney Williams, Alana Smith. What made Minnesota so good last year, though, was not only did they have a great core, they had those 4, but they also had a lot of really key depth and key rotation pieces to go along with it. And for a couple of reasons, they are a little bit short of this year. They lost Chechi Zandalasini in the expansion draft. Minnesota was always going to be one of the teams that was hurt most by the expansion draft. They just had the most depth last year. But then we also got news a few days ago that Dorka Juhas is going to miss this season. So those are 2 big wing pieces that aren't going to be on the team. And so now you're relying on Bridget Carlton, who I have in the starting lineup. You're relying on potentially Carly Samuelson, who they brought in via trade, Grace Berger, who they brought in this year. And then maybe this is where we get more Alyssa Peely. Maybe we get more Diamond Miller. But I think there's a little bit more question mark on their depth. But again, This is a great team. We're picking straws here. They are still going to be in when it matters. Napheesa Collier is one of the best players in the world right now. They are going to be in the mix when it counts. The number 2 team, right above Minnesota at 31.5 stars, is the Indiana Fever. My 2 big questions for them are, will the key additions vault the Fever into championship contention? And then 2, does Caitlin Clark take the next step into MVP conversation? As we bring up their roster, you can see why a lot of people are really intrigued by them as like legitimate championship contenders. And no, I don't think that's just Caitlin Clark Fever. Yes, obviously a lot of it is led by Caitlin Clark, and she is our 3rd 5-star player this year. They are going to go as far as she can bring them. If she is not as good as she is, this team obviously wouldn't be as good. But I think the depth of talent that they've now assembled, I think that makes them a really true contender. And I'm not surprised that they are 2nd in my team rankings because, yes, obviously Caitlin Clark is 5 stars. But Kelsey Mitchell at 4 stars, DeWanna Bonner, Aaliyah Boston 3.5 stars, Natasha Howard, Sophie Cunningham, Lexi Hull. That's a really good, 7 deep rotation. And if they can get anything else out of maybe a Demiris Dantas or a Sydney Colson, this is going to be a very dangerous team. And yes, it's all going to be surrounded by Caitlin Clark, but they have multiple ways to beat you. They have multiple different scoring options. They have good depth. They have good defense. This is going to be a very popular pick, but I don't think it's just because of Caitlin Clark. Indiana's done a really good job at surrounding her with a good depth of talent. Now the question is, can they actually take the next step? They are going to be facing very veteran-laden teams in this top tier. New York's won it. Las Vegas has won it multiple times. Minnesota has been in big playoff games. So can they take the big step? That's the question, but they definitely have the talent to do so. And then that leads us to my number 1 team, at least by player ratings, and that is the defending champs, the New York Liberty. My 2 big questions for them are, 1, does Breanna Stewart keep her spot as one of, if not the best player in the league? And then 2, how do some of their bench pieces shape out? As the number 1 team, they obviously have a great roster. As we pull up the roster, Breanna Stewart is my 4th and final 5-star player. She is also going to be my big question for this team because to me, Breanna Stewart has been a great player. Obviously, her years up here in Seattle were great. She's one of the best players in WNBA history. I do think she slipped a little bit last year. And by slipped, I mean she might not be the best player. She's now top 5 maybe. And she struggled a little bit in the unrivaled season. And then she had off-season knee surgery. So the big question is, can she still be a top player in this league? Because if she can, and if her, along with Jonquel Jones, who was my 2nd 4.5-star player, if those 2, along with Sabrina Ionescu, with the addition of Natasha Cloud, this can still be the best team. And they certainly have a big case to go back-to-back. I do have concerns with Breanna Stewart, and I think she's got to prove she is still one of the best players in the league. She's certainly capable, but there are still question marks there. Outside of that, like I mentioned, the bench is going to be another question because Benijah Laney Hamilton, she is going to miss most likely the whole year. They lost Kayla Thornton in the expansion draft. The Liberty were another one of those teams that had kind of a lot to lose in the expansion draft. So those are 2 big pieces that they're missing. Leonie Phoebish, she's going to step into the starting lineup. She'll be great. Niara Sabli was great last year for New York. But after that, there's some questions. Can Maureen Johannes come back after a year off in the WNBA? Can she be a big piece? Can Isabel Harrison be a big piece? They have some depth. It's not like they have nothing on their bench, but there's question marks. So I think they are the reigning champs. They are the number 1 team by rating for me this year. But there are questions enough that I don't think it's just a guarantee that they'll go back-to-back. And so that wraps up our rankings for teams. Liberty, number 1, followed by the Indiana Fever, Minnesota Lynx, Las Vegas Aces as my sort of top tier for this year, followed by the Storm, Sparks, Wings, Mercury, Dream, and Sky in a very loaded middle group, followed by the Mystics, Sun, and Valkyries, rounding out my ranking for this season. As we wrap up, let me get to just some quick awards and my championship pick, because that's going to be the big thing. I mentioned when we talked about Minnesota, I think this is going to be Napheesa Collier's year. I think following her really good unrivaled season, I think following up her really good WNBA season that kind of unfortunately ended, probably not how she hoped. I think she's going to be very driven. I think she's going to be the best player in the league. You could argue, is she the best player in the world? You might still say A'ja Wilson. But to me, for this year, I think that's going to be Napheesa Collier. So I think she wins not only MVP, I think she also wins Defensive Player of the Year and really just asserts her dominance in the league. My Rookie of the Year, I'm going to go chalk. I think it's Paige Bueckers. I think there are a lot of other interesting rookies. I think there are a couple others that maybe could have really good seasons. But if we're talking Rookie of the Year, I think she's pretty much a lock as long as she doesn't get hurt. I think Paige Bueckers wins Rookie of the Year. And then my championship pick, I'm not going to go with my number one team based on rating. New York, I think, had a great season last year. I think they will have another good season, but it is very hard to go back to back. So I don't think they will go back to back. I don't think they will even make the championship game. I don't have them in the top two. I have the Indiana Fever making the championship game, but I think they're just a little young, maybe a little inexperienced in some places. I think they fall up just short. And I have the Minnesota Lynx as my WNBA champs this season. So I have Lynx over Fever. I'm putting, obviously, a lot into Napheesa Collier. She is my MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and champion with Minnesota. But it's going to be a fun season. There's lots to look forward to. I genuinely think all 13 teams have something to look forward to. And as I mentioned at the top, this could potentially be the biggest season in WNBA history. You could argue last season was the biggest. I think it's only going to get bigger from here. That means a lot of good things for the WNBA. A lot of good things for the players, for the fans, for just the sport in general. Lots of fun things to look at. So we are going to break all of it down throughout this season, throughout this summer. So again, if you liked anything you saw, make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below if you liked any of this, if you want to see other things. We got plenty more WNBA stuff, lots of other sports coming, but this was a breakdown of everything in what should be a really exciting WNBA season to come.